The rhythm of my life had become predictable, shaped by years of routine. My days revolved around steady work, an active lifestyle, and a marriage I believed was grounded in mutual respect. But gradually, cracks began to surface. My wife, who had once been my closest ally, started pulling away. Her frustrations emerged in sharp words and frosty silences, and the warmth we once shared felt like a distant memory. Still, I refused to believe our foundation could truly crumble. I clung to the hope that this was just a phase, a challenging season, like all couples face at times. But as time passed, it became harder to ignore the signs. Little things started to stand out, subtle changes in her daily habits, a growing secrecy about where she went and what she did. It all came to a head the day I decided to follow her after work. That was the moment everything changed, the day my comfortable illusions shattered, leaving me to confront a truth I never imagined facing. When I woke up, my body betrayed me. As I lay sprawled on the unforgiving ground, a cloud of dust rose with each labored breath, stinging my throat and clogging my nose. Even the slightest twitch sent fresh jolts of agony shooting through my battered frame. I once read somewhere that the human body can't register pain from multiple areas at once. Let me tell you, whoever came up with that nonsense was full of it. Pain erupted from every corner of my body, like a symphony of suffering, and there was no escaping it. A low groan escaped my lips, only to be met with a voice cutting through the haze. "Hey, idiot! You awake and ready for round two?" The words dripped with mockery, followed by a cold, sharp laugh that lacked any hint of genuine humor. I stayed still, forcing myself to piece together my thoughts. The first coherent thing that came to me was my name. "Charlie Wilson," I muttered, barely audible, the words grounding me in the moment. "That's right. That's who I am." I clung to the details, each one feeling like a lifeline in the chaos. "I'm 33 years old," I whispered to myself, the sound of my voice helping to steady my scattered mind. "An accountant. 6 feet tall. 200 pounds. I work out 3 times a week. Run a 5K twice a week. Mountain biking sometimes, just to mix it up." My breaths grew steadier as I recited these facts, each one giving me something solid to hold on to. "I'm married. Emma Wilson. She's 30. We've been married 5 years. Whatever this was, whatever had landed me here, I knew my life wasn't going to be the same after today. We don't have kids, not because I don't want them, but because Pam doesn't. She's always said she wants to live a little more before settling down with that kind of responsibility. I remember that now, and it's exactly why I was lying here, breathing in dust and fighting the pain. Our home life had been crumbling for weeks, maybe months. It wasn't just the lack of intimacy in the bedroom, though that was part of it. No, the issues ran deeper. Pam had grown hostile, lashing out at me for reasons I couldn't begin to understand. Mocking comments about everything I did, or didn't do. Explosive anger over the smallest inconveniences. Even insults about my masculinity, my family, my appearance, things I never thought would come out of her mouth. It felt like every word she spoke was designed to chip away at me piece by piece. She stopped cleaning up after herself and refused to cook, something we used to enjoy doing together. I'd try to hold it together, to keep the peace, but she made it impossible. Our home was no longer a place of comfort, it was a battlefield. I remember how we met, how things started between us. But right now, those memories felt like a waste of energy. They were a ghost of what used to be, and I had bigger issues to deal with. Finally, after weeks of enduring the neglect, the verbal jabs, and the constant tension, I hit my breaking point. I decided to take action. I took the day off from work and followed Pam as she headed to her job at the local supermarket. I didn't have a plan, just a gnawing suspicion I couldn't shake. After her shift, things got interesting. It should have been the kind of night for a walk or sitting outside under the stars. But instead, it was the kind of night that would change everything. After Emma left work earlier, I tailed her to the nearest convenience store. That's when I saw her pop the trunk of her car and pull out a small overnight bag. For context, the car she was driving? A nice ride, and not thanks to her. Her supermarket wages barely covered her designer clothes and makeup, let alone anything more substantial. I'd always been happy to cover the bills, I loved her and wanted her to have the best. But as I watched her now, I felt that generosity turn bitter in my throat. What had I been paying for? When she came out of the store, she was dressed in a way that made me do a double take. She'd swapped her work clothes for the shortest microskirt I'd ever seen. If she hadn't been wearing a string underneath and had been shaved, you could have counted every hair on her mound without even squinting. Her blouse was practically see-through, and it was clear she'd ditched her bra too. She strutted to her car, swinging her hips like a woman on a mission, completely unaware, or unconcerned, that I was watching. She drove off, heading straight for the seediest bars on the outskirts of town. I followed at a safe distance, my gut tightening with each mile. Emma eventually pulled into the worst dive bar in the area. It was a notorious biker hangout, not the kind where you'd find weekend charity rides or poker runs. No, this was the kind of place that gave bikers a bad name. Emma parked her car at the far end of a row of bikes, ensuring anyone standing around could get a clear view of her legs as she stepped out. A couple of bikers loitering by the entrance watched her with obvious interest, grinning and nodding as she passed. Clearly, she wasn't a stranger here. I stayed back, parking my old truck a good distance from the bikes. Sure, I could afford something newer, but this truck was reliable and got the job done. As I stepped out, my jaw clenched. My mind raced as I prepared to follow her inside, unsure of what I'd find, but knowing it wasn't going to be good. This truck wasn't just a ride to me, it was a legacy. As I stepped out and closed the door, the bikers outside gave the truck a quick glance. It didn't stand out enough to hold their attention, so they just went back to their conversation. As I walked past them, the faint, unmistakable scent of weed hung in the air, fitting for a place like this. I wasn't dressed for a business meeting, and that was intentional. Wearing a suit to tail my wife would have stuck out like a sore thumb. Instead, I had on a pair of jeans and an old t-shirt, casual enough to blend in, even if I didn't quite fit the crowd. I stepped inside, and the atmosphere hit me immediately. The air was thick with smoke and stale beer, the kind of place where nobody cared who you were as long as you didn't start trouble. There was no cover charge, of course there wasn't. This wasn't the type of joint where they worried about things like that. I made my way to the bar, ordered a beer, and didn't bother asking for anything fancy. Whatever was on tap was good enough tonight. As I sipped my drink, I kept my focus on the mirror behind the bar, letting it give me a view of the room without being obvious. It didn't take long to spot Emma. She stood out like a sore thumb, or maybe a trophy, depending on your perspective. There weren't many women in the place, and she outshone the biker girls by a mile. She was perched on the lap of a guy who made everyone else in the room seem small. Even seated, he looked like a mountain. This guy had to be well over 6 feet tall and north of 250 pounds. His beer belly hinted that not all of it was muscle, but he clearly spent enough time lifting to keep himself imposing. Emma was laughing and flirting, her arms draped around his neck like she didn't have a care in the world. I stared into my beer, trying to decide if I should just finish it and leave. My heart pounded as conflicting emotions swirled in my chest, anger, humiliation, and something I didn't want to admit felt a lot like heartbreak. As Emma broke away from kissing the giant, she glanced around the room, clearly making a show of it. She wanted to be sure every woman in the bar saw that she had claimed the alpha male. Her gaze flicked past me at first, but then it snapped back, her eyes locking onto the back of my head. I saw the recognition flash across her face in the mirror. I shot off the bar stool like it was on fire, every instinct screaming at me to get out of there. I was halfway to the door when I heard her voice cut through the din, loud and sharp. "That's my husband. Charlie, stop him. Someone, don't let him leave, he's going to ruin this for all of us." Before I could make it another step, a hand clamped down on my arm. Spinning around, I shoved the guy hard into the wall, the force enough to knock him off me. Adrenaline surged through my veins, and I took a few more desperate steps toward the exit. That's when another guy swung at me, aiming for my head. I saw it coming at the last second and ducked. His fist glanced off my skull, but I wasn't about to go down that easily. I wasn't always an accountant, I grew up in a rough neighborhood, and I knew how to handle myself when things got ugly. Before he could regroup, I countered with a sharp, well-placed punch to his solar plexus. He let out a guttural grunt, folding in on himself as he struggled to suck in air. I didn't wait for him to recover. My mind was singularly focused on one thing: getting the hell out of there. I didn't bother sticking around to see if the guy I'd hit went down. My focus was on the door, it was just a few steps away. But before I could reach it, another enormous guy appeared, stepping into the doorway like some kind of human wall. Behind me, I heard someone yell, "Behemoth! Get him! Get him now!" I froze for a split second, sizing him up. This guy was massive, easily over 6 feet 5 inches and built like a freight train. He wasn't just blocking the door, he was making sure there was no way I was getting out of there without a fight. My old football coach's words echoed in my mind: block through your opponent, not to them. Dropping my shoulder, I lowered my center of gravity and charged, aiming for the open space outside the bar. I drove into him with everything I had, landing a solid punch to his chest and forcing him backward. For a moment, it seemed like I might actually break through, but he wasn't letting go that easily. He managed to wrap his arms around me just as we cleared the door. Using my momentum against me, he heaved me over his left shoulder like I weighed nothing. I flew down the steps and hit the ground with a brutal thud, dust exploding around me as my body slammed into the dirt. The impact rattled me, but adrenaline surged, forcing me back onto my feet. That's when Behemoth joined the fight. God, he was a monster. Huge, powerful, and relentless. He tore through my defenses like they weren't even there. I tried to protect my face and torso, but his punches were like sledgehammers. I don't even know if I landed a single hit on him, his body felt like it was carved out of stone. Every punch, every kick, every blow sent waves of agony through me. It didn't take long before I was on the ground again, struggling to breathe through the pain. But he wasn't done. Behemoth stood over me, delivering strike after strike, barely breaking a sweat as he dismantled me. And through it all, he kept taunting me. "Take this, loser. You think you can come into my place and cause trouble? Huh? How's that working out for you?" His words were as sharp as his fists, designed to humiliate as much as hurt. The world spun around me, every nerve screaming in protest. All I could do was endure, as I lay there, broken and humiliated. Behemoth's taunts cut deeper than his punches ever could. He leaned down, his voice dripping with malice. "I'm gonna screw her 3 times tonight just to show you who's in charge," he sneered. "I drill her every time she's here, and then you get my sloppy seconds when she comes home." The insults kept coming, each one more degrading than the last, until I could barely lift a finger to defend myself. My body had given up long before my pride did. I was fading fast, barely holding onto consciousness, and as the world dimmed, I heard Emma laughter. She was laughing at me, at what they'd done to me. Behemoth barked orders to the others. "Keep an eye on him. If he moves, let me know. I want another crack at this little piece of crap before I'm done." When I finally came to, my head felt like it was splitting in two. I didn't know how long I'd been out, but the dirt beneath me was dry, and the blood crusted around my face told me it had been a while. One of my eyes refused to open. It didn't feel swollen shut, so I guess dried blood was blocking it. Slowly, I wiggled my right hand, which had been pinned awkwardly under me when I fell, and brought it to my face. My fingers trembled as I rubbed at the dried blood, each movement sending shocks of pain through my ribs. Eventually, I managed to get my eyelid open enough to see a little. My left eye was fine, which was something, but the rest of me felt like hell. Breathing was agony, sharp, stabbing pains with every shallow inhale told me I probably had a few broken ribs. But I didn't have time to sit and assess the damage. I needed a way out, and I needed it now. I scanned my surroundings as best I could. The biker's behemoth had left behind to watch me were lounging against the building. They looked far more interested in their booze and whatever dope they'd been passing around than in keeping an eye on me. Either they thought I was too broken to move, or they didn't care. That was my chance. I began inching toward my truck. It wasn't pretty. I moved just a few inches at a time, dragging myself forward as quietly as possible, and then pausing to make sure no one had noticed. Every movement sent waves of pain rippling through my body, but I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek to keep from making a sound. It wasn't just my ribs, I hurt everywhere. But I couldn't let that stop me. It felt like an eternity, but I finally made it to the line of bikes near Emma's car. Slowly, I got up onto my knees, fighting the urge to cry out as the pain hit me in sharp, unbearable waves. My breathing was ragged, but I forced myself to stay quiet. The shadows were my only ally right now. When I glanced toward the building, I saw that my so-called watchers were still distracted, slouched and barely paying attention to the parking lot. Probably too drunk and stoned to care about much of anything. If I hadn't been in so much pain, I might have laughed. These guys wouldn't have lasted a day in a real fight. The Taliban would have eaten them alive. I turned toward my truck, hunching over to stay low and moving in slow, deliberate steps. The parking lot was quiet. No one seemed to notice me. When I finally reached the truck, my heart was pounding in my ears. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking, and unlocked the door. Then it happened. The dome light flicked on. That soft yellow glow might as well have been a spotlight, cutting through the darkness of the lot and painting me like a target. My breath caught as I froze, waiting to see if anyone noticed. Body refusing to give in even as my mind begged for an end. I cursed myself for jacking up the truck so high as I struggled to climb inside. Every movement was agony, and the only thing keeping me going was the fear of being spotted before I reached the relative safety of the cab. I gritted my teeth and sucked it up, dragging myself in and collapsing into the seat. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps as I reached out and jammed the key into the ignition. Once I shut the door, the dome light finally turned off, mercifully plunging me back into darkness. I sat there for a moment, trying to calm my nerves and plan my next move. Starting the truck would shatter the silence and immediately give away my position. I needed a way out, fast, but without alerting every drunk and stoned biker in the area. As I glanced out the windshield, an idea struck me. A slow, painful smile spread across my battered face, but the ache in my lips and teeth quickly made me regret it. Right in front of me, about 30 yards away, sat Emma's car. Lined up beside it were all the bikes, neatly parked like dominoes waiting to fall. Did I have the power to pull it off? I'd have to. I couldn't risk crawling back out to engage the hubs for four-wheel drive. The old truck didn't have the fancy automatic system like newer models. This was going to have to be done in two-wheel drive. My jaw tightened as I made my decision. It was time. I cranked the engine, and the old Dodge roared to life on the first try. The sound broke the quiet like a thunderclap, and I didn't waste a second. Slamming the transmission into low gear, I floored the gas pedal. The watchers by the building, groggy and blurry-eyed, snapped their heads up just in time to see the truck barreling toward Pam's car and the bikes. I wasn't aiming for subtlety anymore. This was going to be loud, messy, and unforgettable. The heavy timber bumper on the front of my truck hit Emma's car dead on, slamming into its left side with enough force to lift the lightweight vehicle off the ground. I knew because I saw it. The car crashed sideways into the neatly parked bikes, sending them toppling like a chain reaction of destruction. The deafening screech of metal on metal erupted through the lot, waking the bikers fully and sending them into a screaming frenzy. I kept my foot on the gas, pushing forward with everything the old truck had until I couldn't go any farther. The tangled mess of Emma's car and the crumpled bikes finally brought me to a halt, but by then, the damage was done. The chaos behind me was just getting started. I quickly threw the truck into reverse, relieved when nothing got stuck under the wheels. The last thing I needed was to be trapped here. Twisting the wheel sharply, I hit second gear and cleared the worst of the wreckage, metal screeching as I rolled over twisted remains. Then I swung the wheel hard again, aiming for the rest of the bikes. This time, I hit them with enough force to shove the tangled mess right up against the bar's door, effectively blocking anyone inside from getting out. I would have loved to ram the building itself. Hell, I wanted nothing more than to drop the whole thing on Emma and her lover, but that wasn't an option. My battered body and the truck were already pushing their limits. So, I backed up again, spinning the truck around and kicking up a massive cloud of dust as I tore out of the parking lot, leaving chaos and screams behind me. The pain in my chest flared with every breath, and my broken ribs felt like they were on fire from the effort of steering and shifting gears. I needed medical attention. Not from the local community hospital, though. No way. That place would have half the town buzzing with gossip before I even got admitted. I decided to head west, about 50 miles, to the nearest trauma center. It was a long drive, but I didn't see any other choice. For a few blissful miles, the two-lane highway stretched out in front of me, empty and quiet except for the rumble of the truck's engine. I thought maybe I'd gotten away clean. Then, in the distance, I spotted a couple of headlights behind me. A few more appeared soon after, and I realized it wasn't a convoy of cars, it was motorcycles. No flashing red and blue lights, though. No cops. Just the bikers. The headlights grew closer, and soon the familiar growl of their engines filled the air. My gut twisted. I guess I hadn't taken out all of them after all. A couple of bikes pulled up alongside me, their riders yelling something I couldn't hear over the roar of the engines. Suddenly, I felt the thud and rattle of chain links bouncing off the side of my truck. Damn it. I doubted they could do any real damage to the Dodge, but the paint was definitely going to take a beating. My mind raced, searching for a way out. I knew I couldn't outrun them, those bikes had a higher top speed than my old truck. I had to get creative. Gritting my teeth, I yanked the wheel hard to the left, swerving over the center line and forcing the two bikes on that side into the ditch. Those big hogs weren't built for off-road, and they went down hard, the riders tumbling off as their bikes skidded and crashed. I barely had a second to breathe before more riders appeared on my right. With a quick twist of the wheel, I swerved again, hoping to send them the same way. I sent the bikes on my right careening into the dirt, watching as one guy flipped off his bike, cartwheeling into the weeds. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. But there were still more behind me, their engines roaring as they closed the gap dangerously. The thought of one of them jumping into my truck bed sent a chill through me. That would be too close for comfort, way too close. Thinking fast, I slammed on the brakes. There was a satisfying thump, and I didn't wait to find out who or what I'd clipped. I hit the gas again, the old truck surging forward. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, the headlights were gone. Just like that, they'd vanished. It felt too easy. My mind raced with doubt. In every movie, bikers harass the car driver until they either force them off the road or win in some dramatic way. Was it really that simple to beat them in real life? Or was I missing something? As I neared Centerville and the trauma center, my thoughts shifted back to Emma and Behemoth. There was no way they'd just let this go. My instincts told me they'd already be working on how to find me. They'd probably expect me to head home to lick my wounds or go to the nearest hospital. And when I wasn't at either place, they'd start looking further afield. I couldn't let myself get cornered. If I ended up in a regular hospital bed, unprotected, I'd be a sitting duck. My mind worked overtime as I slowed the truck to a crawl. Then, an idea hit me. An old acquaintance of mine had some land near Centerville. He hadn't lived there for years and only rented out the pasture occasionally. It wasn't much, but the abandoned farmhouse and barn were still standing, surrounded by tall trees. It might be the perfect spot to hide. I took the back roads until I found the place, pulling in and parking my truck behind the barn, out of sight. Every movement sent waves of agony through me, but I gritted my teeth and worked quickly. I left my wallet and ID in the cab, then carefully placed my keys on top of the rear wheel, where they wouldn't be easy to spot. Walking hurt like hell, but I forced myself to move. I needed to put some distance between me and the truck. As soon as I made the emergency call, law enforcement would likely be out searching for it. I hobbled down a gravel road, one agonizing step at a time. After about a mile, the pain became too much. My breath was short and shallow, and every step felt like fire in my ribs. Finally, I sat down at the edge of the road, gravel biting into my skin, and pulled out my cell phone. Dialing emergency, I whispered when the operator answered. "Help me," I said, my voice barely audible. I was abducted, beaten, and woke up on the side of the road. I don't know where I am. Please send help. Everything I said was true, except for claiming I didn't know my location. I really had no idea where the gravel road ended, but I was counting on them to ping my phone's GPS. I whispered something about being on a gravel road, but I told them there were no signs or landmarks to guide me. My voice wavered as I let the phone drop to my side, too exhausted to hold it any longer. I lay back, my body finally succumbing to the pain and exhaustion. Whether I fell asleep or blacked out, I wasn't sure. The next thing I knew, someone was bending over me. At first, their face was blurry, and I couldn't tell who it was. My chest tightened. Had Behemoth or one of his cronies found me? My heart raced as I tried to focus. It was definitely a man, but it wasn't Emma, and I doubted she'd sent someone to help. I knew it couldn't have been Emma bending over me. Her car was totaled back at the bar. Unless she'd found another ride, which seemed unlikely, it wasn't her. The sky was starting to brighten with the first light of dawn, though I wasn't sure which day it was. Had I been lying here for more than 24 hours? Time felt slippery, hard to pin down. The man leaning over me kept asking questions, his voice cutting through the haze of pain and exhaustion. I decided to call him the voice in my head. My own voice was barely audible, a raspy whisper thanks to the beating in what felt like days without water. My throat burned every time I tried to speak. "My name is John," I croaked, pulling the name out of thin air. "I live in Wilsonville. I'm 40 years old, and I'm allergic to penicillin." Of course, none of it was true, but without my wallet or ID, there wasn't much anyone could do to disprove my claims. As long as I stuck to my story, it was my word against anyone else's. I told the voice I must have been mugged, knocked unconscious, and dumped out here in the middle of nowhere. "Can you tell me what day it is?" I asked, my words slow and deliberate. He answered, and relief washed over me when I realized I hadn't been unconscious for more than a day. Time hadn't slipped away completely. It wasn't long before I heard the faint wail of sirens in the distance. Soon, an ambulance arrived, and I was loaded onto a stretcher. The paramedic in the back started in 4 and gave me something to ease the pain and nausea. The bumps on the way to the trauma center made me wince, but I kept my complaints to a minimum. The sooner I got treatment, the sooner I could figure out my next move. At the trauma center, a nurse gently washed the dried blood off my face, her soft hands a stark contrast to the violence I'd endured. The doctor tooted and shook his head as he examined my injuries. I stuck to my story, telling them I'd been abducted, beaten, and dumped in a rural area. I don't have my wallet, I explained when they asked for ID. Must have been taken when I was mugged. I gave them a fake birth date, my mom's birthday combined with my brother's birth year. It made me 36 instead of 40, but I doubted anyone would care to check. Besides, I was groggy and bruised, so a little fuzziness in my answers probably wouldn't seem suspicious. Soon, a police officer entered the room and started asking questions. His notebook was out, pen poised, and his tone was calm but probing. I told him I'd been abducted near a nearby town, a small one, but not so obscure as to seem unbelievable. The area was littered with small towns, so it wouldn't be hard for him to believe. For now, all I had to do was stick to my story and avoid any holes. My real challenge was coming up with a plan for what would happen next. Centerville made for an easy lie, it was close enough to be believable without needing much thought. But when the officer asked for my home address, I realized I'd have to come up with something else on the spot. My stomach tightened. Too many lies could trip me up, especially if I wasn't careful. I'm divorced, I added quickly, shifting the conversation. I don't have any family nearby. That lie felt easier to manage. No worried relatives to contact, no one to cross-check details with. Then the cop threw me a curveball. Do you ride a motorcycle? That one was surprisingly easy to answer truthfully. I used to, I said. Years ago, but I haven't owned a bike in a long time. Why do you ask? He paused, then leaned in a little. We're investigating a series of accidents about 20 miles from here, he explained. 2 bikers were, well, eliminated in one crash. 6 others are injured, broken bones, one with critical head trauma. It's bad. What's strange is that none of the riders can tell us what happened. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face as blank as possible. Really? That's awful, I said, keeping my voice steady. The officer nodded, his brow furrowing. Yeah, it doesn't add up. These aren't inexperienced riders. They're hardcore, know how to handle themselves on the road. Crashes like this don't just happen out of nowhere. We're thinking it might have been caused by a rival gang, but we're still piecing it together. I shook my head, trying to appear as clueless as possible. Man, that's rough. Sounds like something out of a movie. Yeah, well, he said, giving me a long look before jotting something in his notebook. Let us know if you remember anything useful. Could be important. I just nodded, working hard to keep my expression neutral. Inside, my mind was racing. I don't even know anyone in a bike club, I replied, keeping my voice steady. No one I work with owns a bike or does poker runs. The officer leaned in slightly, studying me with that practiced look cops get when they're trying to sniff out a lie. Any idea who might have wanted to hurt you? Nope, I answered quickly, shaking my head. Like I said, I'm divorced, live alone. I work on a non-union construction site, and we haven't had any issues with the union guys in a while. I go out for a beer maybe once a week, but I've got a bit of a drinking problem, so I don't let myself get too drunk anymore. Last time I did, I paused for effect, I didn't sober up for 3 or 4 weeks. That was hell, trying to get my reputation back after that. My ex-wife remarried, and she seems to be doing fine. Honestly, she probably left me because of my drinking. I don't think her husband would be jealous of me, she's probably told him all the awful things I used to do. The officer scribbled something in his notebook, then looked at me for a long moment before finally standing. All right, he said, get some rest. If you think of anything, let us know. I nodded, watching him leave with a neutral expression plastered on my face. Inside, I was glad to have sidestepped his questions, but I knew he'd probably be back if he dug too deep into those accidents. A nurse came in not long after. The doctor wants you to stay the night, she said, her voice soft but firm. He's concerned about your kidney function. There was some blood in your urine. You've got broken ribs, too. There's not much we can do about those except give you some pain medication to help you breathe properly. I nodded and let her do her job. The thought of spending the night in the hospital wasn't ideal, but I didn't want to risk pushing my body too far without proper care. Once she left, I reached for my cell phone. There was only one person I could call for help right now. I dialed my brother, David. "Hey," I said quietly when he answered, his voice groggy from sleep. "I know it's early, but I need some help." David was the laid-back type, rarely rattled and always willing to help, no matter the time. I just hoped this favor wasn't going to push him too far. David didn't even blink when I told him what happened and where I was. I included the fake name the hospital had me under in case he needed to come by. "What do you need right now?" he asked, his tone steady. He'd always liked Emma, but he didn't give me any grief about her. I figured that might come later, once he had more time to process everything, but not now. "I need my stuff out of the house," I said. "If you can arrange for a mover, someone who won't ask questions, and make sure that woman doesn't interfere, then we can get everything into a storage facility. Can you handle that?" "Yeah, no problem," he replied without hesitation. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, David had a few connections. He knew guys who knew other guys, people who specialized in no questions asked, quick moves. I texted him a list of the things I wanted taken from the house, the essentials and a few sentimental items. I didn't care if they had to force the door open to get in. The house wasn't going to be mine for much longer anyway. Once that was set, I made another call, this time to Mike, a realtor I'd grown up with. He was an old friend from the neighborhood, and I trusted him to handle things quickly and discreetly. "Mike, I need a quick favor," I said when he picked up. "No problem, Charlie," he replied, his voice as calm and professional as always. "What's going on?" "Emma cheating on me," I said bluntly. "With a biker. I don't know his name, but he hangs out at Mario's over on the edge of town. I'm not too worried about him right now, we'll deal with that later. What I need from you is to list my house and sell it fast, before Emma gets any ideas about moving that idiot into my place." There was a brief pause before Mike responded. "Got it. I can handle that. You want me to meet you somewhere to get the details?" "I'm in no condition to meet," I said. "I'll text you the address, the details of the house, and where to send the paperwork. You'll need to go through David for access." Mike didn't push for more information. "All right. I'll get started on it. You focus on recovering." "Thanks, Mike," I said, feeling a small weight lift off my shoulders. At least a few pieces of my life were starting to come together. I paused for a moment, trying to steady my voice. "I bought the house right after we got married. Emma's credit was a mess, it ruined our chances of getting a house together. So, the mortgage and the title are in my name only. I always planned to add her to the title, but I kept putting it off. Maybe, deep down, I knew this day might come." I took a breath, letting the bitterness sink in. "Sure, she's entitled to half, but we haven't gone to court yet, and I plan to make things as difficult for her as possible." Mike didn't say much at first, but I could hear the seriousness in his tone when he spoke. "All right, Charlie, I get it. But what happens if Emma's at the house when I go over to do the market assessment and put up the sign?" "She's just a tenant right now," I replied. "She doesn't have any say in the ownership." Mike was quiet for a beat before asking, "Okay, but how should I handle it if she's there?" I thought it over for a moment. "I think you should act as my rental manager. Take her a lease agreement, month to month, and tell her she has to maintain the property in sellable condition and be prepared for showings. Make it clear that if she doesn't sign, she'll be evicted." Mike let out a chuckle, though it wasn't exactly a joyful sound. "I don't think she's smart enough to fight it until she gets a lawyer," he said. And I doubt she'll bother with that until she gets served. That's the plan, I said. The movers will be coming soon. I'll text you their contact info. They'll probably breach a door if they have to. Let me know once it's done. Mike chuckled again, a bit more amused this time. I'll pick up a new lock for whichever door gets busted. After that call, things moved quickly. The nurses transferred me to a new room, where I got some breakfast and, for the first time in what felt like forever, managed to get a few hours of real sleep. I wasn't ready to call a lawyer just yet, better to let Emma stew for a while. She'd realize soon enough that things were unraveling, and I wanted her to feel every bit of it. Later that afternoon, David called back. "Charlie, it's all done," he said, his voice calm and steady. "The guys went over and grabbed everything on your list. They got the recliner, microwave, washer and dryer, the guest bedroom set, your tools and tool safe, everything. Oh, and they cleared out all the dishes, pans, and utensils, too. You didn't ask for those, but they figured it'd make things as inconvenient as possible for Emma." I let out a low chuckle. "I owe them one." "Yeah," David said. "They said she didn't show up while they were there, so it went smooth. Mike's got the new locks already, too. You're covered." Hearing that, I finally felt like I could breathe a little easier. For now, things were going according to plan. I sighed, rubbing my temple as I thought about the bed in the master suite. "What about the bed?" I asked David. He hesitated. "Well, some bleach spilled on it. I don't think it's salvageable. The room's gonna need a couple of days to air out." I couldn't help but chuckle, even though it twisted something bitter inside me. "Was she there?" I asked after a pause. "They didn't see her anywhere," David replied. "Honestly, I think they were hoping for a confrontation. You know those guys, they don't have much patience for witches." I agreed with a flat tone, not having the energy to care. David wrapped up the call, promising to come pick me up when I was released from the hospital. For now, everything was moving forward, at least logistically. Now, you might be wondering how I was handling the financial side of things, whether Emma had time to clean out our accounts. But here's the thing, I'm an accountant. And not just any accountant, a damn good one. Some of my clients come from the old neighborhood, and let's just say not all their income is above board. I make sure their money looks clean for the IRS. Because of that, I've always been careful with my own finances. Emma only had access to 2 accounts, her personal account and a joint account. I regularly deposited money into the joint account for her to use, but she couldn't touch the savings or investment accounts. Sure, I'd eventually have to share those assets with her if the court decided, but not now. Not until a judge forced my hand. At the moment, all she had to rely on were her cashier wages, unless Behemoth was covering her expenses. I checked the account balances from my phone. As expected, she'd withdrawn every dollar available in the joint account. No problem. My paycheck went straight into my personal account, which wasn't even at the same bank. She couldn't touch it. Around 6 in the evening, Mike called me back. His tone was measured, but there was a slight edge to it. I hadn't realized until that moment that he didn't have much love for Emma either. "Charlie," he began, "your wife was a little upset when I showed up at the house late this afternoon." I raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" "Well," Mike continued, "apparently the front door was wide open when she got home, and she noticed some stuff was missing. She was polite at first, but when I pulled out the new lock and started replacing the old one, she lost it." I grimaced at the mental image of Emma losing her cool. "How bad was it?" "She wasn't happy when I put the key in the lockbox and secured it, I'll tell you that much," Mike said with a dry chuckle. "Oh, and by the way, you're gonna need a new front door. That one's too damaged, and it could hurt the sale." I chuckled in return, though I knew the pain meds I'd been given were doing most of the work to lighten my mood. Did she have any issues with the fact that she's now a tenant and has to pay rent? I asked. She didn't say much, Mike admitted. Just a lot of huffing and puffing. But I don't think it's sunk in yet. I made it clear she'd need to sign the lease if she wanted to stay. Good, I replied, leaning back against the hospital bed. Emma might not realize it yet, but she was playing my game now. I asked, my curiosity piqued. Mark laughed bitterly. Oh yeah, telling her the house was for sale went over like a lead balloon. She nearly lost it. Yelled at me to leave, told me I had no right to be there. What did you say? I asked, grinning despite myself. I told her I was the new rental manager and that only the property owner could kick me off the premises. Then I handed her the lease to sign. Naturally, she refused and started demanding to know where you were. She kept saying you weren't answering her calls and asking if you'd blocked her number. I groaned. Well, that didn't exactly help her situation. Did you tell her she'd be evicted if she didn't sign the lease? I asked. Yep. But you know how some people think they know better than everyone else. I gave her 24 hours to sign, or I'll serve the eviction notice. Honestly, I'm hoping she doesn't sign. If she doesn't, she'll be out within 30 days, no problem. And I know a couple of sheriff's deputies who can't stand cheating wives, they'll be more than happy to help her move out. Even if it's just to the curb. After we hung up, I checked my phone, though I was still a bit groggy from the pain meds. That's when I realized I had blocked Emma's number. There were several missed calls, starting around midnight the night before, along with a slew of texts. I debated deleting them but decided to keep them instead. You never know when a divorce attorney might find messages like that useful. I saved the voicemails too, though I hadn't listened to them yet. That night, I managed to sleep pretty well, probably thanks to the medication. But if I'm being honest, I like to think it was the thought of Emma fuming that did more for my peace of mind than the meds ever could. The next morning, the doctor came by with some good news. I was being discharged. My kidney function had improved, and my breathing was stable. Still, he made it clear I wouldn't be running marathons, or doing much of anything strenuous, for a while. I promised him I'd take it easy and of course, avoid getting abducted again. By the time David arrived to pick me up, I'd already sorted out my name with the admissions desk and called my office to ensure the nurse had my insurance details on file. Not having my wallet was still a pain, but at least that part was handled. David dropped me off at my truck, and we drove back to our hometown, not that I could call it home anymore. I wasn't just leaving a house behind, I was cutting ties with everything that had made it feel like home. For now, I was technically homeless, but I didn't feel lost, just ready to move forward. Once we got back into town, I swung by work. As expected, my boss was furious about my unexplained absence. His anger simmered down, though, when I explained I'd been abducted, beaten, and left on the side of the road to die. He seemed genuinely concerned at first, but then he leaned in and asked who might have wanted to hurt me. He mentioned Emma had been trying to find me, and I couldn't help but laugh, a dry, bitter laugh that earned me a strange look. I told him she could go straight to hell. His expression changed, like he was hiding something, and I got the distinct impression he had some personal interest in Emma. Honestly, I didn't care. If his wife was fine with it, more power to him. I arranged to take a couple more days off. It wasn't a busy time, quarterly reports were done, and tax season was still months away, so it wasn't a problem. After that, I got to work rebuilding my life. I found an apartment close to the office. The local economy wasn't great, which worked in my favor, it made housing cheap. Within a few hours, I'd signed a year-long lease, paid the deposits, and transferred the utilities into my name. Then I called my cell phone provider. I switched my plan to a month-to-month deal and arranged to have Emma's phone shut off in a few days. That would give me enough time to let her know she was on her own. I didn't want to leave her completely in the dark, not for her sake, but because I didn't need her using it as ammunition later. Next, I stopped at a furniture rental place and picked out a couch, a bedroom set, and a few other essentials. I bought some pots, pans, dishes, and utensils as well, figuring I could give them back to Emma if she ever asked, though I doubted she would. After that, I called David to set up a time for his friends to bring over the stuff they'd taken from the house. Sitting in my new, sparsely furnished apartment, I decided it was time to confront Emma. I dialed her number, and to my surprise, she picked up on the first ring. "Hello? Is that you, Charlie?" she asked. "Unless someone stole my phone, yeah, it's me," I replied, keeping my tone sharp. "Why do you have to be so insulting? Where are you, and why haven't you been home?" she shot back, her voice cool, almost detached. "Are you really that stupid?" I snapped. "I stopped by a bar to have a beer, and there you were with your new lover. I didn't even try to confront you. After the way you've been treating me these last few months, it was obvious you'd moved on. I was just your convenient bill payer, wasn't I? I tried to leave, but your boyfriend stopped me. He beat me up while you stood there and laughed." My voice was shaking with anger now, but I didn't care. I had to crawl away, Emma. I ended up in the hospital, wondering if my ribs or kidneys would hold out after the beating your boyfriend gave me. And now you're asking why I haven't been back to the house? Are you completely deranged? Why would I put myself anywhere near you so your new man can finish the job? Do you want me dead? She started to stammer, spitting out a stream of defensive nonsense, her voice rising as she tried to talk over me. "I'd had enough. I hope you're recording this," I said, my voice as cold as steel. "Is that what you've been planning, Emma? Get me eliminated, then spin some sob story about how I was just a jealous husband who couldn't handle your innocent relationship with that idiot? Then you'd get it all, the house, my money, my pension, and my life insurance. Bravo. Too bad I ruined your little scheme, huh?" There was a pause on her end, and then I heard her start to cry. Not soft, remorseful tears, but desperate, ugly sobs. "I need you to come home," she choked out. "Everything's gone wrong. The house is for sale, stuff's missing, I think someone broke in before I got back and stole things." I couldn't help but scoff, dark amusement lacing my voice. "Yeah, someone broke in, all right. Someone I know. They took my stuff, along with a few extras I needed to set up my new place. I'll be all settled in by tomorrow. Sucks to be you, though. I'm sure your new man will be there to help you through this." Her tone turned frantic. "How can you be so cruel?" she wailed. "That realtor told me I have to pay rent. Why do I have to pay rent for our home? This isn't right." That's when I lost it. I actually snorted, loud and sharp, right into the phone. "What happened to us? Are you really that clueless, or do you think I'm the dumb one here? Look in the mirror if you want your answer." I didn't give her a chance to respond before continuing. "You decided to treat me like trash and start a relationship with some dirtbag before you even had the decency to leave me. You spent my money on new clothes so you could look good for him. And don't even try to pretend that night at the bar was the first time. You've been seeing him for a while. Everyone there knew exactly who you were and who you belonged to." My voice dropped, turning cold and venomous. "And let's not forget how you stood there and laughed as he beat me half to death. If I'd made a single sound when I woke up, he would have finished the job. Don't think for a second I have any doubt about that." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in before delivering the final blow. "So, kiss my ass, Emma. You're not a homeowner anymore, you're a renter. Deal with it. And Mike's the landlord now," I added firmly. "Don't talk to me about rent, just pay it or get out." There was silence on her end for a moment before she asked, almost hesitantly, "But I need money. There's nothing left in the checking account." "There won't be," I replied coldly. I'll keep paying the utilities until the house sells, but you'll pay the rent with your paycheck. You've got a job, stop spending on makeup and clothes for a while. You've got enough to get by. Or better yet, have your boyfriend cover your expenses. Her voice cracked as she stammered, but you're my husband. You were supposed to take care of me. Yeah, I snapped, and as my wife, you were supposed to not cheer on your lover and his friends while they beat me to a pulp. Guess we both lose, huh? There was another pause on the line before she finally asked, what about a car? Mine's totaled, and I need a way to get to work. I couldn't resist. Call your boyfriend, I said sharply. You can ride on the back of his bike, you're already used to straddling something that belongs to him. She fired back, her voice quick and bitter. He's in the hospital with a head injury and multiple broken bones. He was chasing you when you hit the brakes, he slammed into the ground and flew a few meters, landing on his head. I couldn't help but feel a sick sense of satisfaction. Karma, I guess, I said coolly. Too bad he didn't die. You're awful, she muttered. Tell him I'll be keeping an eye out for him, I continued, ignoring her jab. If I see him first, I'll avoid him. Otherwise, I'll be carrying my tool, and this time, I'll shoot instead of talk. Emma launched into another round of excuses, whining about how unfair it all was, but I'd had enough. Eat crap and die, I said flatly, then hung up on her. Her number was still blocked, so I didn't even need to turn off my phone to keep her nonsense out of my life. I tried to sleep that night, God knows I needed it, but without a bed and with too much pain to lie on the floor, I couldn't get comfortable. Eventually, I gave up and checked into a decent motel just to get a few hours of rest in a real bed. It wasn't fancy, but it did the job. The next morning, it took everything I had to get out of bed. My body felt like it had been through a meat grinder. Is this how boxers feel after 10 rounds with someone tougher than they are? I groaned my way into the shower, grabbed a quick breakfast, and headed back to the apartment. By mid-morning, David's crew had arrived and unloaded all my things. They didn't just drop it off, they set everything up for me, which was a relief since I wasn't exactly in shape to do it myself. I gave each of them an extra $100 for their trouble, and they seemed happy with that. Not long after, the rental place delivered the couch and the other items I'd ordered. I tipped the delivery guys as well, grateful for their quick work. The place was starting to come together, even if it didn't feel like home just yet. I realized I'd need to hit the bank soon for some walking around money. There were still a lot of loose ends to tie up, but at least for now, I had a roof over my head and a plan moving forward. That was more than I could say a week ago. I've always been the type to keep a couple thousand in cash stashed somewhere, easy to grab in case things go sideways. Let's be honest, I'm no saint. One day, someone might take an unhealthy interest in the accounting I've done for certain, colorful, clients. My go bag is packed and ready, and no, it's not at my former house. I'm not stupid. After everything was unpacked and set up, I sank into my recliner, the one piece of furniture that truly felt like mine, and started thinking about what came next. Should I keep a low profile for a while, or just go about my business and act like everything's fine? When should I pull the trigger on divorcing Emma? Should I drag things out, keep her guessing for a bit? Maybe pretend there's a chance we'll reconcile, only to pull the rug out from under her at the last minute? Nah, that last idea was pointless. She'd just cling to Behemoth, or whoever stepped in to replace him once he's out of commission. No, maybe I'd keep her dangling just long enough for her to figure out she needs a lawyer. That would make things more entertaining. In our state, the reason for a divorce doesn't matter unless it involves criminal charges. Unless her biker boyfriend goes to jail for what he did to me, and let's be real, that's a long shot, no judge is going to care why we're splitting up. They'll just divide up the assets that are public knowledge. She'll get at least 50%, and the rest will be mine. But here's the thing, I want her to suffer. The gravy train's over. She's going to have to fend for herself now, and I hope it hurts. I priced the house aggressively to sell fast, even in this market, and when it's gone, she'll lose what little stability she has left. As for her boyfriend, Steve, if that's even his real name, I hope he doesn't recover. I hope he ends up brain damaged, drooling into a feeding tube for the rest of his miserable life. Same goes for his buddies. Every one of them who stood by and cheered as he beat me down deserves to suffer, too. Do I expect his friends to come looking for me? Yeah, eventually. Guys like that don't let grudges go easily. They'll want to fix what they see as a wrong against their buddy. It's not flashy, but it gets the job done. The best offense is a solid defense, and I was ready to make sure I wouldn't be caught off guard again. For now, I decided to wait and see what happened next. The next few days were quiet. I went back to work, carrying the judge everywhere, just in case. Then, Emma's new number started texting me. I guess she figured a fresh start with a new phone number would magically fix things. She was acting like we'd had a minor argument, like this was all just some misunderstanding. I wasn't having it. How's Behemoth? I texted back. Her response came fast. What are you talking about? I pushed harder. Your biker buddy. How's he doing? There was a pause, and then she finally admitted, Steve's doing better, but the doctors don't know if he'll ever walk or ride again. A dark smile crossed my face. Karma, I thought. It's a beautiful thing. I couldn't help but roll my eyes when Emma texted me again, asking when I'd be coming home. Home? I thought bitterly. I shot back a single word, never. Then I hung up and blocked her number for good. A few days later, on my way home from work, I noticed a biker tailing me. The guy stuck out like a sore thumb in the business district, leathers, long beard, and an attitude that screamed he wasn't there for a latte. My gut told me he wasn't just out for a joyride. I took a few sharp turns, weaving through traffic to lose him, leaving behind a chorus of honking horns and frustrated drivers. By the time I made it home, I was sure I'd shaken him, but I still kept the judge within arm's reach, just in case. The very next day, another biker tried to follow me. This one was just as obvious, making no effort to blend in. This time, I decided to have a little fun. I led him straight to Emma's house. I figured he likely didn't know where it was, so it was a safe move. Once he drove past her place, I turned around and headed home, hoping for a quieter night. My bruises were healing, but they still looked nasty. Every time I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, it was a stark reminder of what her biker boyfriend and his friends had done. The following morning, I got an unexpected visit from 2 cops at work. They wanted to know about my whereabouts the previous night. I had no solid alibi and was caught off guard when they mentioned that Emma's house had been vandalized. She'd accused me of doing it. I shook my head, half amused, half irritated. Damaging the house would lower the sale price, I pointed out. Why would I do that when I'm trying to sell it? Emma's having an affair with a guy named Steve, the same man who beat me up. If you're investigating, you should start with him. The officers exchanged a look, clearly reconsidering her claims. One of them mentioned reports of loud motorcycles outside my house the night before. That was news to me, but it wasn't surprising. I've noticed a couple of bikers tailing me recently, I explained. They're probably Steve's friends. I don't think they know I've moved, so maybe they assumed I still live at Emma's place. I told them the truth about briefly stopping by Emma's house earlier to grab more of my things. Someone could have followed me there, I added, thinking I still live there. Honestly, Emma should really look into renter's insurance, especially now that the house has been vandalized. One of the officers laughed. Couldn't happen to a nicer person, he said dryly. I spoke to her yesterday, I continued. She's still refusing to sign the lease agreement. I'll stop by with an officer to make it clear she's responsible for keeping the house in livable condition once the damage is fixed." The officer chuckled again. "I assume you're not behind her discomfort." "No," I replied firmly. "I have nothing to do with it. But I'd bet those bikers following me do. Probably Steve's friends trying to stir up trouble. Yesterday, I led one of those bikers past Emma's house," I told the officer. "I'm sure the vandalism was a case of mistaken identity. The cops are looking into it and already have questions for her boyfriend, Steve." The officer chuckled again, clearly enjoying the drama unfolding. Before I could say more, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I glanced at the display. "Emma." I answered, bracing for whatever nonsense she was about to throw my way. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Why are you trying to get the cops on me?" She snapped. "Why would I damage a property I'm trying to sell? Are you on something?" Her aggression caught me off guard for a moment, but I quickly regained my composure. "I thought you'd be smarter than that, Emma," I replied, keeping my tone level. "Now you're accusing me of vandalism?" There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of her swallowing nervously. When she spoke again, her tone had softened. "Charlie, I'm sorry. When you were mad at me, I thought maybe you'd done the damage." I didn't say anything, just waited, and she continued. "After the cops left, I called Steve. He admitted that some of his friends might have been looking for revenge. You hurt a lot of guys and damaged their bikes. That was it." I couldn't hold back my frustration any longer. "I hurt someone?" I snapped. "I was the one knocked out cold after your idiot boyfriend jumped me. How the hell can you say I hurt anyone? I was in the hospital, Emma." Her voice wavered, but she kept going. "Steve and his crew think you're the one who ran them off the road. They were just trying to stop you from going to the cops. You didn't have to hurt anyone." "Jesus Christ," I muttered, cutting her off. "Do you hear yourself right now? I was the one knocked unconscious. Your boyfriend had people waiting to finish me off when I woke up, and you stood there, Emma. You stood there and cheered him on. Now his buddies trashed your house, and somehow, you're trying to pin it on me? Keep popping those stupid pills, and you'll be turning tricks for Behemoth soon enough." "Don't you dare," she started, her voice rising with anger. "Shut up and listen," I barked, cutting her off again. "Mike will be over today to assess the damage for the insurance claim. I'm only insuring the property as a rental now, not as a private home. You'll need renter's insurance. This is our home, not a rental." She yelled, her tone tinged with confusion and disbelief. "Why are you doing this?" I took a deep breath to steady myself, then spoke slowly and deliberately. "What part of your cheating and throwing away our marriage don't you understand? This is on you, Emma. I was happy to support you, but you chose to start an affair and stand by while your boyfriend beat me senseless. You wanted me hurt. Now you're dealing with the consequences. This is all on you." I ended the call with Emma and tried to focus on the rest of my day, but my body wasn't making it easy. My ribs ached with every deep breath I took to calm myself, my face throbbed from the healing abrasions, and my anger simmered just below the surface. As I left work that evening, I noticed another biker waiting nearby. He didn't bother trying to hide, just trailed me a couple of cars back as I drove. It was the same game they'd been playing for days, and I was done with it. I headed toward Centerville, making a series of sharp, unexpected turns to lose him in traffic. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, he was still there, his bike roaring behind me. I had enough. Slamming on the brakes, I turned my truck sideways across the road, blocking the street. His bike wasn't built for maneuvering like a dirt bike, and he couldn't avoid the trap. I stepped out, pulling the judge from my holster, and held it up just enough for him to see I meant business. I didn't point it at him, yet, but the message was clear. His face turned pale as he tried to bluff his way out. "Hey, mister, I don't know what your problem is, but I just want to get home." Why the sudden stop, and the tool? I cut him off, my voice calm but icy. "You've been following me since I left work. We're 40 miles from where you think you belong. No more warnings. You and your friends screwed up last week. I watched Grizzly knock me unconscious while you stood there. Some of your buddies paid for that mistake, others are still recovering. Then last night, you trashed." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "One shot from this tool, and you'll be lying in the street with a hole in your chest, life draining out of you. You'll stay conscious just long enough to realize you're dying and there's nothing you can do about it." He started to say something, but stopped dead when I cocked the judge. The sound echoed in the quiet street. His face twisted into terror. "I told you, no more warnings," I continued. "If you survive this, you can go tell your buddies how serious I am. I've already sworn out a protection order against you and your friends. If this goes to court, I'll plead self-defense. And you know what? I doubt anyone's going to care if I take a few of you out. Hell, I might even get a humanitarian award for cleaning up the trash." The biker glanced around nervously, his bravado evaporating. "Look around," I said, stepping even closer. "Do you see anyone watching? The neighbors probably heard your bike but don't want to get involved. No sirens. The cops either don't know or don't care." He turned his head, scanning the area. The street was empty, quiet despite the early evening hour. I clicked the cylinder, spinning it 2 stops for effect. He looked like he was about to piss himself. Then I raised the judge and fired. The roar of the .410 birdshot shell echoed like thunder as I shot out his headlight. The pellets didn't penetrate anything important, but they shredded the glass, sending a clear message. His whole body jerked at the sound, his fear morphing into panic. "Now get this piece of crap turned around and head home," I said, my voice deadly calm. "It's getting dark, and with no headlight, you're a sitting duck for a nighttime collision. I might follow you, and I'm guessing you wouldn't do so well in the dark." He nodded frantically, turned his bike around, and peeled off like a bat out of hell. I stood there, watching him until he rounded the corner, then climbed back into my truck and headed downtown, keeping an eye out for any of his buddies. When I finally got to my apartment, my muscles were taut with tension, but I felt a grim satisfaction. One more warning delivered, and this time, I doubted they'd forget it. After parking behind my building, I swapped the spent shell in the judge for a fresh slug and headed inside. No more playing Mr. Nice Guy. The rest of the evening passed quietly, and I hoped it would stay that way, but peace only lasted about a month. One night, I drove home, checking my mirrors out of habit. No sign of anyone following me, so I let my guard down, parked as usual, and settled in with a frozen meal and some football. Just as I was getting ready for bed, a loud banging rattled my door. I turned on my phone's video recorder and dialed emergency, calmly explaining that I was in danger. The dispatcher assured me help was on the way and could hear the yelling through the call. I considered opening the door but decided against it, too risky. Letting him break in would make my actions entirely justifiable. The door suddenly gave way with a deafening crash, one hinge torn completely from the frame. Steve stormed in, grinning like a madman. "Well, craphead, time to pay for your mistake," he shouted, raising his fists as he charged. What he didn't notice was the tool in my hand. I acted quickly, firing 2 shots to stop his advance. His grin vanished as his hands dropped and blood spread across his shirt. Staggering forward with a confused look, he muttered something incoherent before I sidestepped, keeping him in my peripheral vision. That's when 2 more bikers barged in, clearly ready to finish the job. I didn't give them the chance. Aiming carefully, I neutralized both threats with 2 quick, deliberate shots. The slugs were devastating, there was no cinematic drama, no bodies flying across the room. Just the dull thud of impact as they crumpled to the floor, groaning and writhing in pain. I called emergency again, calmly requesting ambulances. Reloading the judge, I kept my ears open for sirens, and then I heard it. The low rumble of more motorcycles in the distance. Steve's friends must have realized what was happening and decided they didn't want to stick around for the police. The roar grew louder before fading as they fled the scene. Back in the apartment, Steve was down, clutching his chest and gasping for air. His eyes were still filled with hatred. "You hole," he rasped, his voice weak but full of venom. "Why didn't you just die when I punched you? She belongs to me now." I leaned in close, my voice deadly calm. "I told her to warn you. I said I'd avoid you, but if you came after me, I'd put you down like a rabid dog. Clearly, you didn't learn your lesson. I hope your friends do, before I deal with them, too." Steve sneered, still trying to look tough, but his eyes betrayed him. I lowered my voice, speaking just above a whisper. "I have friends who won't say a word, they'll just make you and your buddies disappear. No one will know where you went. Your families will wonder, but there will be no answers. Just a hole in the ground." His eyes glazed over, and with a final, ragged breath, Steve was gone. The sirens arrived shortly after. When the police burst in, I made sure to appear non-threatening. Kneeling on the floor, I placed the judge in front of me with the cylinder open and the shells neatly lined up. My hands went behind my head as the officers entered. The first officer kept his tool trained on me while others cuffed me. They also cuffed the 2 surviving bikers, even though they weren't much of a threat anymore. A quick search turned up knives and brass knuckles on all of them, reinforcing the self-defense claim I was prepared to make. Paramedics arrived, rushing the 2 wounded bikers to the trauma center. I gave a full statement once he arrived, explaining the events without leaving anything out. They also confiscated my phone, reviewing the time-stamped emergency calls and video footage. They found pictures of my previous injuries and texts from Emma that painted a clear picture. The district attorney had plenty of evidence. I was booked on manslaughter, assault, and firearm charges, with the detective warning that more charges could follow. But I wasn't worried. My attorney handled the interrogation like a pro, and by the next morning, I was released on my own recognizance. The press spun the story in my favor almost immediately. Public sentiment was on my side, and the DA's office was flooded with calls demanding my release. Though charges were still pending, I knew I had the upper hand. Emma, however, had other ideas. She was waiting outside the courthouse when I left, seething with rage. "You butcher," she shrieked. "How dare you liquidate my man? He just came to bury the hatchet." She lunged at me, her hand raised to slap me, but 2 nearby cops acted quickly, cuffing her before she could make contact. My attorney wasted no time pressing charges for domestic assault. I hoped the DA would play the video of the break-in and attack for her during her hearing, though I doubted it would shut her up. Emma was delusional, plain and simple. Since my apartment was still a crime scene, David offered me a place to stay. While I was there, we had a council of war, discussing how to handle Steve's remaining friends and ensure they wouldn't try anything else. The first order of business? Mario's, the biker hangout where this whole mess started. Overnight, the owner sold the place to a group of investors. The bar was set to close and undergo a family-friendly renovation. Word spread that it would reopen as a venue for kids' birthday parties. Steve's crew would need to find a new spot for their drinking and scheming. Before the bar officially closed, a couple of tough-looking guys, clearly packing serious heat, walked into Mario's and took over the club's usual table. From what I heard later, everyone at that table left knowing that any retaliation would be a problem for my friends. A few familiar names were dropped, old acquaintances with reputations that would make anyone think twice. The message hit home. Weeks later, the charges against me were dropped. Emma tried to stir the pot, but the DA made it clear that lying to the police was a felony. She finally admitted that Steve wasn't trying to hire me as an accountant, he was out for revenge. She didn't seem remorseful, though. I think she actually believed she loved him, and that he felt the same. In the end, it cost me half of my publicly known assets to get Emma out of my life, but it was worth every penny. And just to clarify, that was only the publicly known assets. After the final hearing, I heard that a very unpleasant woman paid Emma a visit. Whatever she said, it seemed to shut Emma up for good.